Let's talk about postmortem. There are quite a few steps that we take after a patient passes away during the postmortem process, and so I'm going to walk you through those steps. And just know things may vary depending on your hospital's policy, but this is the gist. The first thing once a patient passes is I'm going to let the family know that they have passed away. The majority of time, the families are at the bedside, but if they are not at the bedside, I'm going to give them a call to let them know that the patient has passed. The only time I would not feel comfortable calling a family is if the death was unexpected. If this was not an expected thing, let's say the patient had a spontaneous cardiac arrest, something crazy happened, this is a conversation I would want the provider to have with the family. But if this is your typical, hey, we're withdrawing care, the family's aware that the patient is going to potentially pass soon, I would feel comfortable calling and letting them know if they weren't already at the bedside. Once the family knows that the patient has passed, I'm going to go in with another nurse and do a 2-nurse death pronunciation. This may vary depending on where you work, but at my hospital, we can have an order from the provider that says 2 nurses can go in and pronounce a patient dead. We check things like pupil response, any reflexes. We check for a pulse. We also listen to heart and lung sounds. And once we have verified that, yes, this patient has expired, we fill out some paperwork in our charting system. Once I have the official time of death, I will call my state's donor network to let them know of the time of death. And from there, the family can continue to visit. Every hospital may have a different variation on timing for how long a family can stay until we have to, transfer that patient to the morgue. And so I'm going to allow the family to visit at this time. I'm going to lay the patient flat if they are not already flat, because after a patient expires, that rigidity sits in. And if they are sitting up for a couple hours, they're going to end up kind of stuck in that position. And it's really hard to put somebody into a body bag when they are not completely flat. I'm not saying that to be morbid. I'm just saying it how it is, and it's a consideration that we have to make. Once the family's done visiting and they are leaving, I will confirm with the family that I'm not anticipating any more visitors. And the reason why is because one time I had a family that said they were leaving, and then a random family member came back into the room to grab something, and we were already doing postmortem care and putting a patient in a body bag, and it's just really not a fun situation for the family to walk back into. So I just like to confirm that they are officially leaving and I can begin the cleanup process. A lot of family members like to know, well, what are the next steps once we leave? And again, this may vary depending on the size of your hospital and the resources you have. We have a morgue at our hospital, and so we will clean patients up and we will send them to our morgue. And then from there, the family will pick a funeral home if they haven't already, and our morgue will connect with the funeral home of choice and get that patient over to that funeral home. In smaller hospitals, a lot of times the funeral homes will actually come pick up the patients themselves. But at my hospital, we are responsible for taking out all the patients' lines, getting them cleaned up, and putting them in a body bag to transfer them to the morgue. Only time I would not remove the patient's IVs and Foley and whatever other lines and drains they have in them is if the patient was a medical examiner's case. There are a couple different reasons we would call the medical examiners to see if they want to accept this patient for an ME's case. For example, if the patient was a trauma patient, if the death was unexpected, or if we can't quite figure out why this patient passed, if there's suspicious circumstances surrounding the patient's death. If the patient meets the certain criteria to call the MEs, we will call the MEs and they will let us know if they accept that patient for an ME case or not. So if the patient is an ME's case, we don't remove anything. If the patient is not an ME's case, we can go ahead and get everything removed, get the patient cleaned up, and send them down to our morgue. There's a little bit of paperwork that we have to fill out with all the patient's information, time of death, and everything like that for our record. And that also gets submitted to the computer system and sent down to the morgue with the patient. And from there, you have an empty room and you just never know what you're going to get. But that is the process of postmortem care. I know that this varies little bits here and there, so I'm curious if there's any steps that are different for you at your hospital.